I think that's what everyone should do. You shouldn't agree with someone that has made 10 successful games on everything, but you also shouldn't disagree with someone that has never made a game. We saw a video from this guy before, right? We did saw a video from this guy before. He's currently making a game in Godot, and he is using feedback from players and statistics to figure out how to make people play his game for longer. And we've also played the demo version of this game, which was a little bit clunky, but it was okay, I guess. For me, it was a little fast. So, and we're gonna watch his, I think, almost latest video, how we can improve our playtime. And for those of you who don't know, I'm making a tower defense game in C++, and this is what it looks like. And we are currently also working on gameplay, aka keeping the player engaged. And just today we added in a nice little option to make projectiles return back to the player, which in my opinion is a really cool idea that changes gameplay and affects how, you know, a player might play the game. Back to raid, please. Okay, see you in 5 minutes. And so stuff like this changes the game and maybe keeps the player engaged longer because they have something to look forward to. If you know, sprinkle this out throughout the game, you know, making stuff change as we go along. And so let's see what type of tips he can give us to make people stay in the game longer, because that's ultimately what Steam looks for. How many players buy your game, and then how long do they stay in your game?
Replayability. It's something that almost all games strive to have, but few seem to actually pull off. It's the type of thing that AAA studios often seem to get completely wrong, but can send a game made by a single dev into the stratosphere. As an indie...
That's how the Wukong game was built. Replayability without DLCs.
Dev myself, replayability is something I think about a lot. And about a month ago, something happened to me that completely changed the way I think about replayability forever. Okay. I've been running a public playtest for my game, Blood Thief. And to my genuine surprise, one of these levels that takes about 5 minutes to complete has somehow generated dozens, and in some cases...
This is gotta be speedrunners. To make the... I think for his game, it has to be speedrunning.
Hundreds of hours of gameplay for playtesters.
Has to be speedrunning.
What happened? Why is this janky, unfinished level so compelling and so replayable that some players are playing through it upwards of 100 times or more? I've been watching clips from players, reading hundreds of feedback comments, and poring over hundreds of thousands of...
Wait, so let's get this straight. How is he gathering the feedback? Because we know that on Steam right now, there is a way to make a demo version as your like main page or as a separate page. And then on that separate page, you can collect reviews. And he doesn't get that. So it looks like whenever you playtest his game, there's another way they give him feedback. He uses Google Docs. So how do I get to the Google Docs? If I am here, I don't see anything. Maybe it's an in-game review button thing. So data collection settings. This demo tracks basic and anonymous playthrough stats. Back. Okay, so by default, this is on. Let me... So how does he advertise? Like, it's not in the game here. Nowhere. It's credits, settings, and play. Maybe it's after the part where you ran into skill issues, you couldn't progress further, like at the end. Display tutorial tracks, controls, speedrunning, display hidden, controls. Move left, wall jump, slide, attack, parry, air dash, restart, shoot, crouch. Maybe after you finish the game. Yeah, maybe after you finish the game, you're right. So... I'm not gonna finish the game, okay? I'm not a speedrunner with this type of game. But maybe it's after you finish the game, and it's also not in the description here. Interesting. Okay, so somehow he collects this data. I find this very interesting.
And in this devlog, I'm gonna go over what I found. The three-step formula that I'm using to make Blood Thief more replayable. Spoiler alert, it's not to just throw a bunch of random achievements at the player and call it a day. I'm going to pick apart the things that I've done right, some on purpose and some on accident, and more importantly, some of the things I think I screwed up on. And
I tried going in there, but I couldn't.
Some of the things I can do to make this level even better. All right, let's dive right in.
Incentives, okay. Why would
Let's start this off by taking a look at the first level that players encounter. It has no name and no theme. In the main menu, it's just given the ominous and highly visionary name, Tutorial. When I first introduced it to playtesters a few months ago, I don't think it was replayable at all, really. Players beat the level, and that was it. And what I realize now is that the reason it was so unreplayable was an incentives issue. At some point in the process after I first released this level, I made a simple addition to the game that maybe was one of the highest value changes I've made so far from a replayability perspective. And that change...
I get 1 point!
...was a timer.
Yeah!
It's such a simple feature. And honestly, players expect it because it's in so many games. But adding it completely changed how the game is played because it gives the player an incentive to replay the level.
Exactly.
Before, when a player beat a level, that was it. You either beat...
How would we create an incentive for players to play our tower defense game? Do we need the gold? The gold, there it is. So this gold number right here, you see that? This is how much gold you earned during playing this level here. You can get gold by killing these monsters and then drop stuff. And then when you get to home, to this area right here, you can, it adds the gold on top. And so essentially you can keep farming gold and then investing gold into upgrades that I still need to design. But this is essentially like you can replay missions just to earn money and farm money. Gold. Gold. It is gold for tower defense game. That's also why you play Kingdom Rush. You replay the missions to get 3 stars. True, true. And maybe difficulty settings for the same map, a more difficult version. I mean, that's a no-brainer, but yeah. Okay.
The game or you didn't. It was binary. But now there's a moving target for the player to always strive to beat
3 stars.
Their best time. And in an attempt to make the incentive of improving your best time even more enticing, I added a leaderboard on the end screen. To me, a leaderboard serves 2 purposes. The more obvious purpose is to promote competition among players, which is an extremely powerful incentive. Yes. Look at just about every
How could we do a leaderboard in our tower defense game? What would the leaderboard rank? I still have to think on that. There must be some sort of endless level, how far you get into an endless level. That would be a leaderboard. Obviously, you have to be very careful about cheating then, right? I don't know how to defend against that.
Their multiplayer game out right now. Like, I've got over 400 hours on Rocket League. But if this was just some game with a campaign where you play against bots, I'd be surprised if I played it for more than 1 or 2 hours. Competition can be a huge reason to replay a game. Leaderboards also provide another hidden incentive that I think is perhaps even more impactful. Curiosity. True. Let's put ourselves in a first-time player's shoes. You just went through the tutorial for the first time. In the beginning it was hard, but hey, by the end of it you started getting the hang of things. You defeat that final mob of enemies and reach that coveted end level screen. Awesome. You beat the level and it only took you 6 minutes. But how was Camera able to do it in 50 seconds? For some players, just beating the level will be enough. But for others, seeing those leaderboard times motivates them to think,
get to the list.
Yeah, I beat the level, but can I do better? And it's those thoughts that get you to hit that restart.
I earlier thought this was another video. I will link it to you. It's about monetization and tactics. They used to keep playing games and spend more money, but the tactics are still interesting. Yeah, you can link it. If you want, you can also link that in Discord, in React suggestions. Yeah.
Button and give things a second look. By the way, it would be somewhat irresponsible for me to talk about how great leaderboards are without bringing up the very thing that plagues their existence.
Cheating. Cheated time. It's 70 now, huh? How do you get away from cheating?
Cheaters. Unfortunately, cheaters just seem to be an inevitability when it comes to leaderboards. This is something that even large game studios struggle to keep at bay. And
so let's say I'm an indie developer. I develop my game. This street right now. I develop my game alone. Do I just ignore protection against cheating and just try to use my own, like I only accept the time that is too low if I see a video, something like that? Like
my game is
Games Done Quick you need a video, you know, for the speedrunning world records?
Certainly no exception. I'm currently taking a manual approach and just moderating the leaderboards myself. And I'm relying on speedrun.com to be the canonical source of truth for actual competitive speedrunners. I'll take this moment to shout out Truffle, Niviera, and most of all, Nayudi for setting up and moderating bloodthiefspeedrun.com page. It's thankless work and it keeps the community fun and fair for everyone. So
yeah, people like these help you. Like you have no idea how much they help you out with this. So it's awesome that he shouts them out. It's very important. Yeah.
Oh, seriously, appreciate y'all.
You
just make your own high score the limit.
Promoted. You are now one of my elite employees.
So with leaderboards, the game is adding curiosity to go back and see what other strategies there are to get a better time. But a game can build curiosity in lots of different ways. For example, Vampire Survivors, like all...
Let me think. Vampire Survivors builds curiosity with the different levels, thinking what the next level might bring in terms of enemies. The first level is decently easy. The second level gets a little bit more difficult. And then the third, fourth, and fifth level, they get progressively more difficult. But you do not get more crazy buffs. You do get buffs by collecting gold, but the curiosity is what the level brings, essentially. That's what it's gonna say.
Great roguelikes. Builds curiosity all along the way by presenting you with periodic power-up choices and only letting you pick one at a time. Once you finish a run, you can't help but be curious how things would go if you tried again, but made
Smart. Yeah, true. He's right. Yeah.
a different choice along the way. I think building curiosity may be the most powerful incentive for replayability. So that got me thinking, what can I add to the game to make the player more curious? Well, besides leaderboards, I also put 4 secrets in the tutorial.
So more curious in my game would be... I love making this comparison every time. More curious in my game would be having unlocked a bunch of skills in the skill tree, right? We have all of these unlocked, bloop, bloop, bloop. And then we just decide we can only pick one every time, right? We can pick one of these 3. What if I chose a different one, right? What if I chose a different path? You know, what if I went completely different? I think that's how curiosity could work for my game. Together with weapons combined.
And the player is told at the end of the level how many of them they found. For many players, this is enough to make them curious to see what they missed, but also to see what happens when they find that secret. Is there new content, a new item, a power-up? I think this is a great addition because not every player is motivated by getting the best time or competing with other people. Some players are motivated just by exploring and finding cool stuff. These incentives, competition, choices, curiosity, they get the player to hit that restart button. Different players are motivated by different things, so it makes sense to be multifaceted here and think about the different approaches to incentives that you can take in your game. But
that's why Dark Souls is so great. The first time you play Dark Souls 1 and you finish the game, you're like, man, I just learned the game. I need to play it again to be better. Yeah.
incentives are only the first step that I took to make my game more replayable, and only a small portion of the bigger picture here.
What could be the other steps?
So that brings me to my next section. Reward the player for replaying. We can dump tons of incentives in our game.
True. So in my game, that would be you earn money every time you start a mission, and that money accumulates over time. Exactly like in Vampire Survivors. Have you noticed when you play Vampire Survivors, you're never losing your time? Every time you play the game, you gain something permanently. That's how the game keeps you engaged and rewards you constantly. It's awesome. And I learned that from that game.
All day long. But if the player just gets bored a minute into replaying, the player will very quickly learn to just ignore those incentives, and eventually will learn that your game really has nothing left to do that is interesting. Was that secret that they spent 10 minutes looking for just a meaningless trinket? Did the level force the player to approach the game in the exact same way that they...
You could save the player inputs and save the in-game replays for cheat verification, because if they cheated, the replay should be broken. Yeah, so I thought about, let's say when I do a playtest for my game, a demo version, I want to record the inputs in like some sort of list for each frame. And then every time the input happened on that frame number. But for me, that would be more feedback from the demo. If someone sends me this input, I can replay the game and see how they crashed, for example.
Approach it the first time.
We'll see how we do this.
Did replaying the level give the player the same gameplay experience that they had on the first playthrough? Or is it presenting something new to the player that is making their replay worth their while? This is a part where I think I got lucky and I kind of stumbled into some accidental replayability in my level. Let's take a look at this part of the tutorial. Conventionally, it plays like this. You wall jump up this ledge here, jump across this gap, hop through these pillars, and get ambushed by this knight right here.
Okay, that's
new. You're then faced with a locked door, but thankfully you see a key right in the corner here. So you hop a few more times, grab the key, and go on your way. Okay, now let's go back to this section of the level. But this time, let's look at it from the lens of a player that's replaying it and trying to get the best time possible.
I see.
What most players miss on that first playthrough, and what I even missed when I designed this level, was that instead of walking across the plank right here, you can actually just slide across it to gain speed, jump across this entire gap and go straight for the key. This saves you a ton of time and is also just a fun set of moves to sequence together. Now, this is a relatively simple and obvious example, but there are tons of little sections like this all over the map where there's the obvious way, and then there's the endless spectrum of non-obvious ways that are faster yet more difficult. What's kind of amazing is most of these non-obvious routes I didn't even make on purpose. What's important though is that the player has the ability to play the game differently on this playthrough. They get to try new things, find new routes, and overall be rewarded for being better this time around. For example,
but if I gather the input, I know you could simulate the entire game using the input, but who tells me that let's say I gather this in a binary file, right, to make it more difficult for them to cheat it. You could still go into the binary file and then change, let's say, a 1 button press to a number 2 button press if you know what you're doing, if you know how the memory is laid out. And then all of a sudden the input script, essentially, or the binary file that you're being provided is fake. It doesn't work. It wouldn't help. But you're right. Like, it would be a different result and therefore the time would be different. And then obviously I can see, oh, the time is different. What you provided me is not giving me that exact time. You must be cheating. You're right. Like, that could work.
Well, if this alternative route was slower, then what's the point? As for those 4 secrets that I mentioned in the last section, right now I reward the player with a power-up when they find a secret, which can be another awesome way to give the player some fresh gameplay. But I think secrets are also a great opportunity to introduce lore, Easter eggs, or other stuff that didn't really make it into the main gameplay loop. And I'm really excited to do all sorts of weird stuff with secrets. To cap off my point about incentives and rewards, I'm thinking about incentives like a promise that I'm making to the player. And the reward is like me delivering on that promise. With leaderboards, I'm promising that there are some routes and mechanics that the player missed on their first run. And when the player goes back, all the new gameplay experiences that they have deliver on that promise. With secrets, I'm promising that there's some interesting stuff that the player missed. And when they find that secret and get that awesome power-up that does some unique thing that they've never seen before, that's the game's way of keeping that promise. One area...
I don't know about showing UI, displaying how many secrets are left in the game. I think it's cooler if you stumble across these secrets by accident and you're always left thinking or wondering whether there's more secrets to be found in the same level that you just went through, or is there just one secret? So for example, a game that does this very well is, again, Dark Souls, because they don't tell you anything about secrets or hidden items that you can find, or maybe even like, okay, the DLC is a terrible example, but you know how in Dark Souls you can find so many unique NPCs and conversations just by sheer accident because you did things right. And they're not telling you that, oh, by the way, out of these random encounters, you have been able to get 5 out of 7. So there's 2 more random encounters. You should get them. They don't tell you that. So I don't know if this is a good idea or not. Maybe.
Where I completely dropped the ball on is with these locked doors I put all over the place.
If you don't say it's in the UI, like the player might miss it. Yeah, you're right. The player could miss it if it's not in the UI. I totally agree. So maybe there's a different way. You play through the game, then you find a secret, and then maybe it tells you found one of the secrets or something. And then you'll know, okay, there's more secrets, but you don't know how many. Maybe, right?
To me, this door is a promise.
Them by accident
the promise
and be
being
surprised.
that on the other side of this door is something cool, and it's worth taking the time to figure out how to open it. And yeah, spoiler alert, the door doesn't open. My naive self just put it there because I thought it looked cool, and some players spent hours trying to figure out how to get to the other side, only to find out from me in the Discord that, yeah, those doors don't actually open. So in this sense, I broke a promise that I made.
This guy debated the bro
to the player, and I think that this type of thing hurts a game's replayability. Moving forward, I'm either going to remove the doors or keep the doors there and actually put something cool behind it. So
yeah,
I
you
keep
should
that
put something
promise
cool
to the
behind
player.
it.
Quick side tangent. I think the old school graphical style that Blood Thief uses really lends itself well as an environment that keeps its promises to the player. I think a major downside of the hyper-realistic games that
I think pixel art style, which this game is, or old school style, really it invokes a feeling of nostalgia in a lot of players, and I think it's a really good thing to do, especially for certain types of games.
we're all used to nowadays is that even though they're incredible to look.
And exactly, if you have these types of games, people will judge your game based on the graphics more so than based on the gameplay on first look. So if you try to emulate this graphic style as a solo developer, not only do you have a lot of work to make it look very realistic, you're also getting a lot of flack from people that are just gamers that just want to see a cool looking game and play a cool looking game. They see your game, it doesn't look top notch. They say like, oh, the game looks bad. Why would I spend time on this? But if it looks more dated on purpose, then they're like, oh, cool. That's one the game that I remember that I played 15 million years ago. That's awesome. Cool. Let me check it out. It's a different, yeah, it's actually, that's smart. Yeah.
They're chock full of broken promises to the player. Doors that can't be open, NPCs that have nothing interesting to say, and distant vistas that can't actually be explored. As players, we've kind of gotten used to this, and I think it's one of the strengths of having super simple visuals where theoretically everything you see you can interact with in some interesting way. To cap off this section on rewards, I just want to point out that I'm really just scratching the surface here. Most games have achievements, badges, or point systems that give the player some sort of recognition for their extra efforts. And while I haven't...
You do get that in Dark Souls too. And I wanted to go into... I don't know if Dark Souls is a good example. I played Dark Souls a lot, but I have never finished an NPC quest on my own. What do you mean? You have never finished an NPC quest on your own. What does that mean? An NPC quest? Like you do multiple of those. So for example, how you meet the golden guy, the guy that ultimately kills your flame, what's it called? Flamekeeper, Firekeeper. He kills her, and then you then you kill him and you can revive her. That's an NPC quest that you do in the game. And you don't have to do it. If you don't free the guy, if you don't find the guy in the castle, then that never happens.
Explored this stuff yet.
It's astronomically unlikely to finish an NPC quest without a guide. But that's the spoilers. Yeah, that's what I mean. So you're left wondering, what did I miss? Exactly. And that's the cool thing. That's why you want to replay it. That's why you want to pay more attention to your surroundings the next time.
For Blood Thief, I definitely plan to. So stay tuned on that and let me know in the comments if you have any ideas for additional ways I can reward dedicated players. Incentives and rewards are how a game may hook a player into the main replayable content loop. But games can only reward the player with surprising new content for so long. We can't all make Baldur's Gate 3, where the game becomes replayable simply because there is just an absurd amount of content and choices to make at every step of the game. I also don't think it's a good idea to balloon the scope of Blood Thief just for the sake of replayability. But that's totally fine, because the games that players play for thousands of hours or more usually get their replayability from something else. Endless mastery. We see endless mastery at play in competitive multiplayer games like Rocket League and League of Legends, where even years after the game has been released...
I don't think you can have endless mastery in a game like Bloons. Guys, would you say that Bloons has endless mastery? Or do you think there's a skill cap on Bloons? I don't think there is endless mastery at all, so I can't go for this. In a game like League of Legends, yes. Why not? Because there's only so many ways you can place a tower and activate your one ability every couple of seconds. There's not much of how Candy Crush has it. I think Candy Crush is different in a way where you track your progress by how easy you can read the map in a low time. Candy Crush is different than a tower defense game. Yes, because it requires more brain power at high levels. No, guys, he's right. But Candy Crush is not a tower defense game. A tower defense game, you place heroes in certain spots. It goes very high with the different spots and abilities, but I think at some point you just have the best build figured out, the best placements, you have figured this out, and then there's nothing more to do. Right? In Candy Crush, it's time together with an overview of the entire map to see, okay, if I do this, then this, boom, boom, boom. That's something that you can improve over time.
Players are finding new skills and techniques to give them an edge over their opponents. And then there are
But endless levels will also mean that even if you will figure out the best strategy for those, and then that's the best strategy.
The non-multiplayer examples like Devil Daggers.
It's not the same as endless mastery, yeah.
try to survive for as long as you can, and there is no official end. The entire game is literally just an infinite loop towards mastery. But for single-player, level-based games like mine that do have a true ending, there is one form of gameplay that stands above the rest to give your game an endless loop that can entertain players for hundreds of hours, and that gameplay is speedrunning. Speedrunning has already taken off more than I ever imagined it would. And I think speedrunning has taken off so much because of a few key aspects of Blood Thief that I did right early on. Namely, these two things. One, most of the mechanics in Blood Thief revolve around speed, which obviously plays really nice with speed.
His game is really fast. If you play the game, you're dashing around in the world like from the very beginning. It's crazy fast.
Speedrunning. In other words, mastery of the mechanics allows you to speed run faster. And 2, the mechanics themselves have a high skill ceiling. The first one may seem painfully obvious for Blood Thief, but what I mean by this is that deep mechanics are not going to be enticing for the player if they're not actually useful towards any sort of meaningful goal. In my case, where I want to make a great game for speedrunning, mastering the mechanics essentially should allow you to move faster literally through the space. So for example, I made wall jump take into account the angle at which you're jumping off the wall. So if you're facing directly forward, you'll jump directly outward from the wall. But if you face the wall slightly, you'll
Wait, so isn't this block the wall?
actually jump forward a bit, thus giving you a huge speed boost. Having the mechanic work like this rewards players who discover and master this nuance by giving them an edge in their speedrun. So there's an example of how I'm trying to design my mechanics to revolve around speed. This point is a little bit more interesting. How do we make mechanics with a high skill ceiling? Well, this is something that game designers spend their whole career trying to do, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm an expert on this. But I've come up with a heuristic that I think has panned out really well for Blood Thief, and so I think it's worth sharing here. In one of my prior videos, I talked about how one of my goals for Blood Thief is to have deep and intertwined mechanics. That is, mechanics that are difficult to master on their own, and also interact with the world and particularly other mechanics in interesting ways.
I wonder if we can apply this to a tower defense game. I guess we can't. I don't see any way to like apply this to my game.
Intertwined mechanics are really fun and lead to some really awesome emergent gameplay. But on top of just being fun, intertwined mechanics serve to expand the overall amount of options the player has at any given moment. For example, if we go back to the room I was talking about earlier, the only reason this level has an alternative route at all is because...
I wonder what these blue boxes are. What is this? Does anyone, if you know what this is in Godot, like, do you get... What is that? Looks odd. Maybe if the player needs to react and change strategy every time, like some enemy spawn can be random and you need to find a good solution for it quickly. Yeah, that could be, but that would be like a special level in a tower defense game. Otherwise, the levels have always need to be the same. I've tried random spawns in my tower defense game before, and what could happen, you could get unlucky sometimes, and then it spawns you a bunch of big dudes and you can't do anything about it, essentially. So it's difficult to have it random, while at the same time difficult, because it could be too random and therefore too difficult. Nav mesh? Navigation mesh?
Room I was talking about earlier. The only reason this level has an alternative route at all is because of how different mechanics interact with each other to create some interesting new options for the player. In the first playthrough, the player just uses the jump mechanic to get from pillar to pillar. And if that really were the only possible approach in this section of the map, it would be totally boring and utterly unreplayable. But when a player is speedrunning, they think a little bit more creatively about how they can use their knowledge of the mechanics to get through the space at maximum speed. And we know from earlier, you can shortcut across this gap.
Yeah, true. So this is what I'm trying to do in my tower defense game too. I know I bring this up a lot because I'm actually doing this to learn, you know? And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, what if we use this sword as an upgrade on a particular wave? Can we use a different sword as an upgrade and still beat the level because we made a different choice? Now, maybe one choice is better than the other, but both choices lead to the same result, which is winning or getting it done. And so then, you know, that's multiple ways. And that also ties into different types of abilities and buffs along the way. So yeah, that's still something I'm working on. Hopefully I'll get this right.
Slide and jump in combination. To present this from a more theoretical perspective, if you have 5 moves your player can make that don't interact at all with each other, then you really only have 5 actions the player is thinking about at any moment. But if all the moves interact with each other, the amount of options that the player has goes up combinatorially.
Yeah, so for example, one more example, okay? One last. This ability spawns orbs around yourself. They fly around you at a fixed speed. If you invest into projectile speed... Fuck, I don't have it on the skill tree right now. Okay, it's gonna be a cut. We're gonna do this right now. So, okay, projectile speed. Not movement speed. No. Projectile speed. Come on, bro. Where is projectile speed right now? There you go. Save this. Right here. We put this projectile speed here too. There you go. And then 4 count here. Okay. And put a projectile speed there as well. And then save that. Yeah. And then over here we do projectile speed as well. Okay. There you go. Let's pretend we had this. So for example, projectile speed would make these shields fly faster. Therefore, they deal more damage because a shield rotating around the character, it hits the unit again if it's fast enough. And then the same thing for this. Projectile speed would make this ability, it's basically just a projectile that gets shot outwards into enemies. It would make this ability fly further because it flies faster. And therefore these two work hand in hand together. Really cool. And so now you can combine the two.
Increase the amount of options we just added to the player's arsenal from 5 to 31. Pair this with levels that present a variety of challenges to the player, and suddenly your game has an extremely high skill ceiling, where the skill is mostly about exploring the decision space and experimenting with different combinations of mechanics in different scenarios, which can be really fun. By the way, if you're...
I feel like this guy is further along on his journey, but he comes up with the same points that I come up with daily when I program on my game. He finds the same solutions that I find. I noticed a while back that I need to give the player as many options to finish my game as possible, and therefore they keep being engaged in the game. And if it's just one possibility, then it's boring. Yeah, I mean,
interested in learning more about these mechanics.
Sounds simple, but it's actually not that simple when you're making your game yourself.
And how they can be used for speedrunning. Nayudi and Niviera have done a pretty incredible write-up on a whole bunch of them over on the Blood Thief speedrunning Discord.
Cool.
I'll leave a link to that in the description. It has a lot of demonstrations, diagrams, and even like numerical analysis. And overall, it's just a fun read. Go check it out. The other way I increase the skill ceiling is to make mechanics generally easy to pull off, but require a lot more precision if you want to use that mechanic to actually gain speed. I do this with the wall jump mechanic, for example, that I mentioned earlier. There's an infinite range of wall jumps that you can perform at various angles, and getting the optimal angle that gives you the most speed for a given scenario requires a lot of skill. The point I'm taking away from this is how complex and interesting gameplay can emerge from the combination of relatively simple mechanics. I've spent a ton of time ensuring that every single mechanic in Blood Thief interacts in interesting ways with all the other mechanics. This means that the player can use these mechanics in all sorts of weird combinations to get to places that are extremely difficult for me to anticipate. And while this is great from a gameplay perspective, giving the player all this movement freedom does make my life a lot harder as a level designer.
Yeah, I tried to go here. I didn't manage to do it. But you can get here, actually. How do you deal with making decisions meaningful? In my game, in a tower defense game, the decision being meaningful is a combination of choosing one of these three and together with the item. And meaningful being that it changes the base of where you started to something that is more advantageous for you in a certain way. So for example, meaningful would mean that one path would allow you to attack further away, so you go all on range, but maybe you don't deal as much damage. And the other path would be your range is not as high, but you deal a lot more damage up close. And so that would be a situational idea where maybe you can somehow stun lock an enemy close to you in a tower defense game, and then you just hit him with 1,000,000 damage. And so that's what I mean by meaningful choice in tower defense game, of course. For his game is different. And you know, these sorts of things.
There's also new opportunities for the player to cheese the entire map with some shortcut or just go out of bounds entirely. For example, if we take a look at this other level in the playtest, I completely missed how easy it was to just wall jump, then ledge climb up this wall right here. Look how this speedrunner manages to skip like a third of the map by climbing up the ledge and shooting this gap right here. Moving forward, I'll definitely need to be more careful to block this type of stuff from happening, but I will say players are having a ton of fun finding and executing on these out of bounds bounds routes, so I think it also makes sense to see how I can build these shortcuts into the game and make it part of the map. Like, I have to admit, executing this move right here to get out of bounds is super fun, and honestly is one of my favorite platforming parts of the game, which is kind of hilarious since I obviously didn't design this section on purpose. And that brings me to the final lesson that I've learned in this entire process. Watch people play your game and see what players are doing to make their own fun. In the last section, players went out of bounds and made a new challenge for themselves.
When I release my demo, guys, will you send me some videos of you playing the game? That is the best way to figure out how you guys do. And I will also try to implement this input system, right? Of course, the input system where I record your input and then I play back the input and we can watch in real time what someone did in the game. That would be so awesome. Sure thing. Oh, well, we'll send a bunch of videos. Yeah, first release the fucking demo, then we'll talk. Yeah, just wait, bro. We're working on it. Okay, bruv? How do you feel? Like, if every option leads to a win, does it make it boring as well? Now, obviously, there will be worse choices. So not every option can lead to a win. But having multiple options to a win is what I'm trying to go for. So no, I do not want to make every option a win. There's obvious choices where you can't actually win if you do the wrong choices. Yes, so for example, if you invest a lot into physical damage and then there's a bunch of heavy armored dudes spawning in the level, you will lose. Because you're a moron. You shouldn't go for physical damage and then try to beat armored enemies with that. You should use something to counter that. And then having multiple ways to counter that is the important part. Not only, let's say, armor penetration or armor reduction, but maybe a buff or that gives you ignore physical armor or magic damage, for example. Maybe poison damage, stuff like that. That allows you to bypass this in multiple different ways.
And trust me, there are tons of examples of players doing that in Blood Thief. But players have surprised me in other amazing ways too. One of my favorites is the Pacifist Run, which I have to give credit to my Discord and more specifically the Blood Thief speedrunning community for coming up with. It basically is just beating the level without killing any of the enemies. While at first this may sound kind of boring, it's actually super fun to have to creatively think about how you're going to have to weave around enemies and how you're going to get to certain spots when you don't have air dash and you don't have any blood to fuel your movement. You really have to be careful about preserving your momentum. And while the Pacifist Run isn't an official part of the game just yet, I'm definitely going to add a badge or achievement for it in a future update. The truth of the matter is, you may have some great ideas as a game designer, but you're not Superman. You're gonna miss some stuff. Your job as the game designer is to find fun, and players are better at finding fun than anyone. So in this video, I outlined the 3-step process that I'm following to make my game as replayable as possible. The first step is to add incentives. Give the player incentives to replay content. Different players are motivated in different ways, so I'm using a range of incentives like competition and curiosity. The second step is to reward the player for replaying. Incentives are like a promise that I'm making to the player, and rewards are my way of keeping that promise. So in my game, it would
be permanent upgrades that are unlockable using gold, and the reward is the gold that you gain by doing a level. That is meta progression, for example. That's an incentive.
And making replaying worth their while. And the last step I'm taking is thinking about how my game can be.
Another incentive is that your heroes level up, you gain skill points, and the skill points are permanent. You don't have to re-level the skill points whenever you level up once. You have the skill point available, and then in the next level you can use those skill points to further invest in your skill tree and be just more efficient, let's say that.
Endlessly mastered. What does that gameplay look like,
killing anyone?
How can I increase the skill ceiling of my game to make that quest towards mastery more challenging and more satisfying? Now, keep in mind, I'm not an expert in this subject, and this is not an exhaustive study on all the things you can do to make your game replayable. These are just some things that I've observed in my own game-making process. If you're interested in trying the game out, you can still join the playtest on Steam by going to the Blood Thief Steam page and clicking this button here.
It's still available now,
let you in, and you'll be able to play right away. I'll leave a link to that in the description. If you have fun with the playtest, definitely give it a wishlist on Steam so you get notified when it launches. Plus, it signals to the Steam gods that I'm worthy of their patronage.
True.
Also, if you're interested in speedrunning or just following the development of Blood Thief, I'll post the links to the Discord in the description.
Ooh, 1 year developer.
That's all for this devlog. Please like and subscribe. Thanks.
Cool. Very, very informative game. And yeah, it makes me think more about incentives. Like the number one thing that I got from the video, hello fellow Gamedev, hello there bloody low, is incentives and rewards. Replayability is creating incentives and then rewards every time the player plays. I think we got that right down already. Just trying to put it together. Okay, guys, if you like the video here, there you go. I'm already subscribed and maybe subscribe to him. I think he has really good points. He brings up very nice points in his devlogs. And I think he's smart. I'm pretty sure his game will be successful. If he keeps looking at the stats, I think that's where he's ultimately gonna gain the most amount of success, following the stats and then trying to improve the stats like playtime and positive feedback. If that gets more and more over time, I think he's on the right track, and I think that's what you should do when you're making a game.